morning. It's Wednesday, the 6th of September 2023. I'm Sian and you're watching Resistance TV. Tonight, I'm going to be talking to Dr. Phil Bevin, who was a former staffer in Jeremy Corbyn's office during his reign at the Labour Party. He's a researcher, an academic, socialist, and a member of the Workers' Party. So welcome, Phil.
Hi, Sian.
Hiya, it's great to have you here again. I know our viewers have seen you a few times now discussing different topics. Now, there are a lot of questions that I have for you tonight. And
oh, great.
Going to be questions from the audience as well. So let's just dive straight into it, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that's obvious to me is you have a PhD. What did you study and why?
God, well, I studied comic books. Well, not just comic books and films in relation to Superman, of all things.
Oh, right.
And the reason I studied it was a long time ago now that I started studying it, is I really liked the idea of Superman as a character and this idea of interrogating what it means to be good, kind of. It's a big question, and it's quite interesting to have a character in popular culture that deals with that, and on an ongoing monthly basis, because Superman comics are still published. The other thing that interested me was, because it's had a continuous publication history and appeared in various media for many decades, since 1938, is how and to what extent, and whether or not they do, like popular culture texts reflect developments in history. So I was kind of studying Superman, but I was also studying doing a discursive analysis. And actually, while I was doing it, as these things do, it turned into kind of something else, and it turned into a study of rhetoric and scientific and political discourse, and how continuity in Superman comics actually could be seen as kind of a playful way of interrogating that. So yeah, it's quite complex, but I guess that's what a PhD is.
yeah, exactly. No, that's really interesting. So is that why you then went to get into politics, or were you interested in politics before that?
I've always been interested in politics in a kind of sort of roundabout way. Unfortunately, and it does pain me to admit this, and I'm still trying to make amends for it in everything that I do, is that I used to support Tony Blair back when I was 16. That dissipated by 2013.
Well, as it did with all of us, yeah.
By 2013, I was definitely not a Blairite. And I joined the Labour Party because I was horrified at the Conservative government, what they were doing, NHS privatisation, all of that. And I thought, maybe Ed Miliband will take the party a bit to the left and be a break with all of this kind of bad stuff that's gone before. So I joined the Labour Party. I got involved locally, and I ended up embroiling myself in an issue of estate regeneration, which unfortunately one of the Labour councillors locally was in favour of, and I realised was going to be horrifying and lead to social cleansing of the people who lived there. And so that really, in terms of political radicalisation, it was a combination of things. It was the estate regeneration issue and the realisation of just how rotten politics was at a national and local level.
When you say regeneration, is that like the people or companies were coming in, like Starbucks and people like that, and taking over the area and building houses that were not within the price range of workers who were living in that area?
Oh, a little bit worse than that, actually. It was, and it's still going on. It was council estate, and the council was planning to, and is now doing, knocking it all down, moving people out, and replacing all the council houses with private flats they can sell off at a relatively high price.
Which they call what's the saying? affordable housing, that's it.
Yes,
Affordable housing. Yeah, yeah. They're doing that in my area as well. And there's no way anyone would be able to afford a 1-bedroom flat that's worth, you know, £175,000 when you're just starting out. It's ridiculous.
So that's kind of one of the things that got me politically radicalized, as it were. The other stuff as well, like my CLP. One of the good things about my CLP, which was quite right wing really, but one of the good things about it was that it was also where an organisation which some people might have heard of, which is Labour to Palestine, or I don't think it's called Labour to Palestine anymore, but I think it's called Travel to Palestine now. But we had speakers from Palestine sometimes at our CLP. And again, the reality of what was going on in Palestine really hit home to me, because up to that point, I'd just been watching like mainstream news and stuff, and I didn't realize what it was actually like. And that changed my perception on that. In terms of like getting involved in politics professionally, it was totally by accident. I had a bad day at work, and so I thought I'll just have a look at the Labour Party jobs website, see if there's anything going, you know, on the off chance, just to make myself feel better. I saw there was an application going in Jeremy's office, closing that evening. So I went home, I bashed out an application and sent it off. And in the end, I got the job, which was just kind of crazy, really. But I'm not a political careerist. I've never really kind of planned to be in politics professionally. I still do not. So I'm much more interested in doing what feels right, and also, given my my slightly obsessive nature and background, researching things and finding out what's true and writing about it and publishing it. That's kind of my thing.
Maybe we'll get into a few of those things later on in the interview. I'm sure you've got some interesting things to tell us. So what year was it when you got involved with Jeremy Corbyn's Labour, and when did you secure that job with the leader of the opposition's office? So
that was it was kind of the worst timing imaginable. It was 2018. In I think it's June or July, so just around the time that all the anti-Semitism stuff was really like hitting the fan, and so it didn't really give much of an opportunity to get settled, because everything, I mean, it really was a terrible period in the office. It was kind of a crisis kind of atmosphere, and of course there was also a bit of a divide between people who took particular sides over that issue, and I was on one side, having been in Kingston and Surbiton CLP where they had those meetings, Labour to Palestine meetings. It was pretty obvious that to me that the need to protect free speech on Palestine was a core issue. My own, although he never said this to me explicitly, my own view till this day is that was a priority for Jeremy as well, but there were a lot of significant other pressures going from the other direction, including from people within his own team who were sort of encouraging him to go to the Board of Deputies and constantly like apologize and justify himself. So that was a weird experience, but you know, I can't say that it was overall negative in any respect. Jeremy personally is a very nice man. He's an absolute pleasure to work with. There are in my particular team where I was, there are other people who I worked with who, to this day, I think are fantastic, wonderful people. And I learned a lot from it, actually. And
how big was that team?
It was quite a small team. So that I'm not Lotto in general, the leader's office in general, which was like 30 to 40 people in various different teams. The team I was in was about like 3 to 5 people. It was very small.
And were you working on a specific project?
We were doing we were basically just doing some of the behind the scenes stuff, doing admin and making teas and coffees. My career highlight today is when Jeremy Corbyn mentioned the quality of the biscuits in the House of Commons, in the House of Parliament. I was quite proud of that because I made a point of getting them from Marks and Spencer's on the way in, because I thought, well, you know.
Well, I hope they were vegan.
I don't know, actually. I also served at Percy Pigs at one meeting, and I then later realised that they're made out of real Percy Pig.
Oh
Or
dear.
if they were, I think that's changed now.
Yeah, they are vegan now. They are vegan now.
Yeah. My lasting regret is one time when I made Jeremy absolutely appalling coffee. Like, I mean, there's no excuse. It's just absolutely appalling coffee.
What did he do? Was he very polite about it, or did he spit it out at you?
He was very polite about it, but I could tell it was a mistake. But yeah, I mean, I didn't do anything particularly kind of noteworthy in terms of contributing to any decisions or anything like that. I did help out a bit on policy stuff from time to time, doing some minute taking, which is really, really interesting. And also it was interesting in seeing some of the then Labour front bench as well. And their grasp of policy was sometimes instructive.
Can you give us any examples?
Oh, I don't know.
You don't have to mention any names.
Well, I mean, there were people who just did not understand the brief, basically. And it wasn't just a case of their disagreeing with Jeremy's particular bent on policy. It was a case of potentially disagreeing with her views on policy because they didn't understand them, and they didn't understand the policy. And that was.
So what would happen in those circumstances?
A lot of negotiating, and I mean, I was not at the higher sort of level, so I didn't actually see how decisions were made and what decisions were made. But I think so in terms of the outcome of those kind of things, I will have seen it on television like everybody else. But I think we can conclude that trying to get people to toe the line wasn't always successful by any means.
Right, okay. Although Starmer's been quite successful at doing that, but maybe we'll.
Because they, he said basically, if you don't agree with me, you're out, and none of them want questioning him. None of them want to question him, partially because they're not smart enough to do so, partially because they agree with him. And I think that's the reality of it. That most of them probably agree with him if they understand the nuances of it, and if they don't, they probably don't care.
Do you think that Corbyn should have been more like that?
I mean, at the time I might have said yes. Now, because I'm looking back on it fairly philosophically, I think it would have been impossible for him to do it. Bear in mind that when it comes to his specific views on foreign policy and other things, and I've written about this before, my view on this hasn't really changed. He didn't have a majority on the NEC even when there was a nominal left-wing majority on the NEC. There were people within his operation who did not agree with him. So I think the fastest route to him being out the door would have been to take a harder line on things. And I think he probably stayed where he was for as long as he did because he didn't do that. And that you can argue whether it would have been better for him to have gone out the door sooner and just, stood up and took it on the chin. But the other side of the argument is that he was serious about becoming Prime Minister. He seriously meant it. I'm not sure it's a job he ever really wanted, but it was a job that he was committed to doing for the right reasons. And I think that is why he tried to compromise and tried to find a way through, which I think is a perfectly reasonable position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always said that, it's not necessarily the person who wants the job that's the person who's going to be right for the job. Those power hungry people who's I want to be Prime Minister, they're not necessarily the right person for that job. But you occasionally you'll get a person that comes along who shows great leadership skills, who shows the hope that people want to see. And they may not want to be Prime Minister, but they'd be the best person to do it. And I think that's what a lot of people felt about Jeremy Corbyn. I think they sort of felt that in their core.
Yeah, I think also there were people in the office who I think wanted him to fit that model of kind of prime ministerial, in inverted commas, more than he would ever have been able to do it. And there's nothing, he would have done it if he could. He would have tried to have done it in his own way. But also, I think it's important to recognise, again, looking back, and obviously I, at the time, was absolutely sincerely dedicated to making sure that Jeremy got in. Looking back now, I don't think it was ever possible that he would have. And if he did, or it may have been possible that he could have done it. If he did, he would have lasted all of 3 weeks. And we'd probably have Keir Starmer as Prime Minister now.
Yeah, that's I haven't thought of it that way, but I can see exactly where you're coming from on that. I mean, it's well known that the PLP were not behind Jeremy Corbyn. He had very few allies within the Parliamentary Labour Party. What was it like amongst the other staffers working there? What was the atmosphere like during that 2018 period? And when did you actually leave Corbyn's office? Was it when he stepped down, or was it before then?
It was when he stepped down. So
I
stayed right till the bitter end, as it were.
Yeah. So what was the atmosphere like?
The atmosphere towards at the end, well, in 2018, it was really fraught, that period, because of disagreements, because of the pressure that he himself was under as well. And it was disagreements at shadow cabinet level, disagreements at, within the office as well. Really, really difficult. And it was just a horrible, horrible situation. But
did you work at Westminster or at Southside?
At Westminster. I did a brief stint at Southside doing admin for the complaints team, which is a whole other story. but I worked at Westminster. But it wasn't, again, I don't want to say that it was all horrible and terrible. 2018, that summer, when I first started, was really, really difficult. And it was difficult. But like I said, I was in a good team with good people, and overall I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed working with Jeremy. Towards the end, it was odd because it was all the COVID stuff kicking off. And one of my big frustrations with Keir Starmer is that in 2020, I think it was before, in the lead up to 4th of April when Starmer got it? I can't remember.
Yes, sounds about right.
Jeremy in opposition showed what leadership could achieve, in opposition, like being an opposition, with the furlough policy, which came from them. It didn't come from the government. Boris Johnson, I gather from third-hand conversations, didn't have a clue what he was doing, but I think that's probably quite obvious anyway. And so that policy was basically foisted upon the government by the opposition. And if you look to say what happened in the United States, for instance, it wasn't necessarily going to happen. And that was a real achievement, actually, which we probably shouldn't forget. And it was probably only possible because Jeremy was there, but also because he was on the way out anyway. There wasn't all this kind of pressure on him to to behave in a certain way and do certain things. So I think that perhaps was a kind of a sign of what it could have been had the Labour left been an entirely different, well, the Labour right and the Labour left been an entirely different beast. Because you pointed out that that he didn't have much support in the PLP, which is of course entirely true, but it's also worth bearing in mind that thanks to revelations by the Electronic Intifada, we know that John Landsman wanted Jeremy out as early as 2016. So the support just wasn't there.
So what was the point in momentum?
I don't know if you realise what a loaded question that is to me, because I've been looking into it.
Probably not, but you've opened that can of worms. Let's get into it.
Well, I want to be careful with what I say, because I don't want to say anything I don't have evidence to substantiate. So I have written about it a bit, and based on what I've researched and looked into, the role of momentum is very interesting, particularly relating to the period around 2016, which is also the period when John Landsman was talking about so I understand, was talking about removing Jeremy, is that the row that blew up over Jackie Walker internally, there is a fascinating, and I keep coming back to it, but it's a fascinating New Statesman article from October 2016 that interviews some senior people involved in Momentum. And it's talking about the whole Jackie Walker situation. And the interesting thing is their approach to it isn't actually, at this point, talking mainly about anti-Semitism. What they do talk about as well, and this is kind of the focus of the piece, is that it's a political disagreement in Momentum, and this distinction between like the supposedly sensible, relatively mainstream Momentum types. And I think the phrase was canary reading conspiracy theorists. And so it was quite obvious that people within Momentum's leadership, even at that time, were making distinctions between their own members, the ones they liked and the ones they didn't like. And as it evolved, you can see that the anti-Semitism issue also became an issue across those factional lines. And at the same time, you also had this debate about what kind of organisation Momentum should be, whether it should be a grassroots member-led organisation or whether it should be a top-down organisation. And I think Ben Sellers actually has commented about this on Redline TV. He knows a lot more about it than I do because I've never really been involved in Momentum. But yes, I mean, that's kind of the fascinating thing about Momentum, is that it did voluntarily police what it considered to be legitimate and illegitimate activists and people. And that's my interpretation of it anyway. And that's right from 2016, from an early stage.
Yeah, I mean, they always seem to have a clique. There was always a clique. I mean, I'm based up here in the Northwest, and there was definitely a clique up here. And nothing could be done without the clique being involved, basically.
And the thing is that clique of people is now, and possibly has always been, it's the this kind of small group of fixers who sort of permeate throughout all the organisations of the left. And so, and I'm not saying this is sour grapes, because, you know, frankly, I'm glad I never got invited to the parties because I hate parties. But there was ways of keeping people like me sidelined and kind of out of the group, which I think are still in play to this day. And again, I really, you know, it's not something that particularly bothers me. Rather the opposite. I'm quite grateful for it because I'm a normal person. I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. You know,
it's factionalism, and you know, we were all supposed to be fighting for the same thing. Momentum was supposed to be a vehicle to support Jeremy Corbyn and to get him into number 10. That was the whole point of it. And there was armies of people out there who were willing to go out, pound the streets, leafleting, talking to people. We were out there every Saturday doing street stalls around different towns and villages in our area, and I'm sure there was thousands of other people doing the same thing, because we all believed, we all had that hope that we could do this. And then to find out that there were people in Lotto and in Southside who were fighting against it, to then later find out that the PLP were not behind Jeremy and they were fighting against him, i.e. during the chicken coup. I know our local MP, Kate Green, in Stretford and Urmston, she was one of the ones behind the chicken coup, and she was in fact the manager for, what was his name, the guy with the glasses?
Owen Smith,
yeah, she was actually his campaign manager. So that didn't go down very well, obviously, for us locally. There was lots of splits that happened during that time when we found out that she was completely involved in that, because we had quite a big JC4PM group, to be honest. And it was only later that we ended up joining Momentum, because we thought that would be a good move for our little group to become part of a larger organisation. Little did we know. Um, so yeah. So is momentum still going? I have no idea. I don't keep in contact with.
I believe so, but I think that's because it still has a Twitter account. Otherwise, I am not engaged with it at all. I'm not
I
into
mean,
anyone who's involved.
if it is still going, you know, it's lost its sort of objectives and its goal, hasn't it? The goal was to get Jeremy into number 10. So I don't know
Well,
what they stand for.
was that the goal though? Because we know that Landsman
Well,
did not, as early as 2016, he did not want Jeremy in. My personal view, and it is my view, one day maybe I'll write about it, maybe not. I've got other things, but is that one of its roles, and we saw this in that 2016 article for the New Statesman that I was talking about, is to an extent contain the left, to distinguishing between the sensibles, the people we like, and the people we don't. Draw in the sensibles, and then you have a Labour left that is run by and controlled by, like you say, a clique, a certain group of people who have a certain outlook, perhaps come from a certain class background, and it's a way of ensuring actually that the makeup of the left and the people who contribute to the formation of its direction, even under Corbyn, is policed. And that is, I think that personally, I think that was one of its functions, whether that's intentional or not. I think that is how it operated. I think that's what happened. And again, the anti-Semitism thing is such a kind of, it just sort of crystallizes all of these problems, because again, that's what happened there. Momentum internally took a particular view on that, and then used their power to lobby for that position internally. But if I was influential in Momentum, that is not the position that I would have been advocating, obviously.
Yeah.
And that's, these are all the things that when you look back, you think, oh my God, what was going on? And we still don't know the half of it. And that's one of the things I've been researching for the past couple of years, but, in most depth in the past year or so.
Well, that'll be interesting to hear in the future when you do get to the bottom of it. And I hope you'll end up writing a book or, something bigger than an article, so we can all find out what the truth is behind it.
Well, I have got to the bottom of it, I think. It's just a case of laying it all out. I've got bits and pieces, but I do now, probably just this week, I can say, I know what happened. I know what's at the bottom of it. I know who's at the bottom of it. I know what the relationships are that are at play here, still at play on the left, and what's going on. So you'll be hearing more from me about it, certainly, whether it's in more articles.
Fantastic. Well, you must come back on and tell us all about it then.
Yeah.
So our Tonight show is about learning lessons from the Corbyn era. And from looking back, from 2018 to when you left, what do you think are some of the biggest takeaways that we can think about or learn from that era, and how does the left go forward from here?
It's a big
Probably
question.
a big question.
I've got an answer, and it's a big answer that I'm sure not everybody's going to like, but including Jeremy himself probably wouldn't like this answer. But I think what Jeremy's time as leader of the Labour Party did, and it is actually to his credit that it's done this, is that it has tested to destruction the idea that you can have a route to socialism via the Labour Party. I'm not, discounting Parliament. I'm saying via the Labour Party. If you look at, and I'm not really an expert in these kind of groups, but if you look at various kind of Trotskyist organizations and the left in general, there has been this strategy of this idea of only we can take the leadership of the Labour Party, we'll have a chance of getting into power and then introducing left-wing policies. Now, what I have learned personally, my takeaway from Jeremy's leadership of the Labour Party, is that if you do get somebody who has the right politics at the top of the Labour Party, he will not be allowed to win. The Labour right will sabotage him, and the Labour left will sabotage him. And you'll end up with a disaster. And if they do get into power, they will be quickly replaced by somebody who's going to reverse everything that they wanted to do. So basically, it means, to me, it proves that the Labour Party, as a route for pursuing progressive politics, is just a non-starter. It has also revealed to me that a lot of the problems with the left in this country, I mean, the organised sort of mainstream left, like momentum, and this is kind of touching upon some of my research, is that you realise when you look into it, a lot of these kind of campaign groups are backed by billionaire financed NGOs. So if you are wondering why they don't always push the message to its logical conclusion, off the top of my head, things like NHS privatisation, the reason might be is because their financiers don't want them to. And that is on the left. So I'm not talking about, the Labour right. These are left-wing organisations that have ties to billionaire finance and even foreign state funding. So it's, again, the organised left, as much as the Labour Party in this country, is essentially captured in terms of what we think, what we want to achieve, which is publicly owned, publicly run services without private involvement. From an NHS point of view, that's healthcare free at the point of need to everyone who does need it, comprehensive to everyone in the country. That is not possible if you are trying to achieve it through a lobbying organisation that is paid for by billionaire capital, because their interests do not lie in that direction. It's not going to happen, and they're never going to get the message right. They're never going to push it hard enough.
That's
and
right.
They will actually lobby MPs, that they're left-wing MPs that they're in touch with, to go against the line that, say, someone like Bob Gill is pushing. And he's completely right on the NHS. And we saw just the other week that he got cancelled for saying things that are frankly just common sense and just demonstrable by the application of evidence. It's just obviously true what he has been saying, and he was almost cancelled because of it. And that tells you everything you need to know about the state of the left. So essentially, I mean, I would agree. I haven't read the book, but there's a book called The Death of the Left, which I know Chris is very keen on. And their conclusion is that we need to begin again from the beginning. And I would agree with that. I think we need to realise that this kind of the Bennite idea of sort of the march through the institutions and taking over the Labour Party has run its course. I think the best thing we can do now is actually reach out beyond the left, mainly to ordinary people who are having a really hard time at the moment, and trying to help them out and win their support. I'm not saying abandon electoral politics, but maybe run as an independent or Workers' Party candidate, but run on policies that matter to ordinary people. And then on a sort of a macro level, unfortunately, I think, again, the established left, like things like Stop the War, has really dropped the ball over the Ukraine crisis. They're talking about green issues at the moment, which, fine, but there could be a nuclear war tomorrow and we'd all be dead. So not quite sure why they're not focused on the issue of NATO. But we've got No to NATO, which is not is a relatively new organisation, which has been brought together by Chris and George Galloway and others, and it has platformed people that many of us don't actually agree with on other issues. But again, it's about building a broad coalition of people who aren't necessarily leftists on specific issues, and then over time you will start to find the people who you agree with on more and more issues, and you'll build a movement that way, more organically than relying on billionaire-backed NGOs and their kind of outriders. I think that would be my takeaway from it. It's not a easy, simple solution, but because it really is building right up from the beginning again. I think it is possible, and actually, although it sounds negative, I don't think it's a negative point of view, because I think it's actually progress to at least know what the problems are and know what you can't achieve with certain vehicles. We're much further forward now than we were when Jeremy was leader of the Labour Party, because back then we all thought that the Labour Party was a viable route for socialism. Now we know that it's not. And so it's a question of what we do with that knowledge. And I am actually, and again, he wouldn't thank me for this probably, but I'm very grateful to Jeremy, because it was his leadership of the Labour Party that gave me that knowledge. I think that's an incredible gift, and it's our duty to use it. And I don't say that lightly. I really mean it. I think it's an incredibly important achievement for him to have stayed in that position so long, been so damn reasonable to a fault.
And it must have been an incredibly painful time for him as well, emotionally.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Absolutely sure it was. Yeah.
The hurt that he must have gone through during that time, I can't. I mean, I went through something of my own with being in the Labour Party at that time and losing my job for supporting him. But I can only imagine what he has been through in the last, since 2015 or since 2018. And he's still going through it. He's still got lawsuits, hasn't he? There's still people coming after him with lawsuits. So all these people that think Jeremy is still our saviour of the left, and he's going to come in riding his white horse to save everybody. What would you say to those people who say, don't leave the Labour Party, stay and fight, and all this kind of stuff? I
would say, leave the Labour Party. You can't fight within it. It's a horrible toxic environment. Get out, you'll feel better for it. I did. I felt better for it. With regards to Jeremy, I have a huge personal affection and respect for the man and his principles. And one thing that wasn't mentioned is also, which not enough people reflect upon, is the personal risk that he took.
Absolutely.
Simply by being in that position. And his life was explicitly threatened once, and he was also, on separate occasion, punched in the head. So he really did, and I know that he knew those risks. So I think we do owe Jeremy a great deal of respect for that. I would say, personally, if he wanted, I would love to see him join in with Chris and George and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's too embedded in the structures of the left as it has been until this point. So these NGO type groups, the big one at the moment is Progressive International, which is a big bugbear of mine because I think it's awful. And he's tied into all of these different things. And I think for him to do what I'm suggesting would be a massive wrench, which, given his history and given his friendships and connections, is not one that I think he would necessarily be able to do, or that it would necessarily be fair to expect him to do.
Yeah.
And if he can't do it, then that's okay. We just have to do it without him, and that's fine. And that, again, that's not a criticism. It's just a reflection of reality.
Yeah, and my feelings on that are that I don't think it's fair of us to be putting that burden on him again. I really don't think it's fair. I think we need to leave him be now. Just let him be, let him do his own thing. He's just turned 70, hasn't he? He's
older than 70. He's 73, 74, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. He's getting on a bit now, and although he seems still very sprightly, I think he's gone through a lot for the left, and I think we need to let him be now, and we need to move on as a group. Having learned these lessons that you've spoken about, having learned about how people will do anything to stop the socialist left from getting into power, we need to take on board these lessons, like the bogus anti-Semitism campaign, which was appalling, but that clearly came from within, from the JLM, directly from the Israeli embassy, and even the Ministry of Strategic Affairs in Israel, the campaign against anti-Semitism, and so forth and so forth. And during my own research on the advisors that were advising certain MPs within the Labour Party, I found there was many of those advisors who were deeply embedded with organisations relating to Israel. People that most people have probably never even heard of because they operate in the background. And I would say to people, just do some digging. I did a lot of my research just through Companies House and looking at these organisations who were involved, and then checking up on these names. And it was surprising, the information that I found out from that, and it was relatively easy to find. It's all open source. It's all there for you to look at. And now we see, some of those people have then been rewarded with power in the Starmer office and Stafford.
We totally true. And to add to the Companies House thing, I'd also say if you're looking into campaign groups and NGOs, their annual reports are always remarkably interesting and useful for finding out where the money's coming from. And like you say, it's surprisingly open. It's just that people don't actually look and pull it all together. But the thing I would add as well is that is also, it's not just, say, groups like JLM, the role of the Labour left. And David Miller's very good on this, and I do encourage people to look into what he's saying. But you had people in left-wing people, and Halima Khan has spoken about this as well, and she's been through a lot. They had left-wing people in the complaints unit who were taking their cues from, say, someone like Dave Rich, who works for the Community Security Trust, which is a UK government-funded organisation that lobbies for Israel. And it wasn't just people in the complaints unit. There's at least one key advisor to Jeremy within Lotto was also praising the work of Dave Rich and saying that what he was saying was sensible on this issue. So it was completely. I think really we need to move away.
Tom Watson as well. There was Tom Watson as well. Let's not forget him. Where's he gone to? He had his mucky paws all over it.
Yeah.
I know that's where my details got siphoned from a particular staffer within the complaints department to Tom Watson's advisor. I can't remember what his name. Dillipool. Somebody did.
I don't know.
This was written about by one of the Times.
Was it? Okay. Oh God.
Pogrund from the Times, who was writing a lot of these articles at the time. He wrote a book, and he wrote all this in his book. Who was getting the information from the complaints department, who was passing it over to Tom Watson's advisor, and then they were then siphoning off to different journalists so that they could write their damning reports. I mean, I was in the Times. Absolute crap. Bullshit story about me in the Times. I could prove every bit of it was bullshit. But the damage that it did to me personally, not only having my name in the Times, but the BBC then took up the story. I came in from work. I was on the 6 o'clock news. It was awful. It was absolutely awful. And then I ended up losing my job because certain campaigners from the Israel lobby got involved and found out where I worked, and I lost my job. So I've told people about this before, it's no secret, but it was an awful time. It was absolutely awful. And that was just me. I'm nobody. I was nobody then, I'm nobody now. I was just an ordinary Labour Party member, and that's what happened to me. It was awful.
I have a story about Pogrund, actually.
Go on then. Gabriel Pogrund.
Yes, Gabriel Pogrund and Patrick Maguire were the people who wrote that book. But it was during the end of my time in Lotto. There was, I certainly know for a fact that many staffers, Lotto staffers, people in Jeremy's team, were going to Pogrund and sharing their stories anonymously, and that these made their way into his book. And I think my impression at the time was that there was there was an organized element of it. So it was being done, not with Jeremy's sanction, but there was sort of an organized group of people going and briefing Pogrund to put their side of the story down for posterity. And again, this really does shed a light on, frankly, the caliber or lack of caliber of the people in Labour left. And one of the lessons I would say is we do need to move away from that whole infrastructure.
Yeah, it's toxic. Absolutely
it's toxic. It's like you say, it's run by a clique. It's not going to achieve anything. It's got investment from billionaires and worse. We need to begin again from the beginning. And that's one of my experiences. There's been so many times where I was in that office. And again, a lot of this is on reflection, but there were moments where while I was there, I was like, what the was that? Like, why is this person supporting the Board of Deputies 10 Commandments or whatever it was called during the 2020? Why have they learned nothing? And it's not what
I think we nicknamed it the 10 Demandments.
But there's so many moments like that when you realize that quite a lot of these people are just fundamentally untrustworthy. They're not working, they're careerists at the end of the day. They're not working for the good of other people. They're not, they're not doing it while we're not careerists. I mean, we're here because
we care.
We care. Yeah. I mean, I don't.
I can't think of any other word. We care about people, and we care about this country, and we care about what's happening in the world, and we can't sit on our asses and do nothing about it. Basically,
if we don't do it, who else will? That's
exactly.
The stuff I write and the stuff I say, I don't do it because I think it will reward me personally. Actually, I think the opposite is likely to be the case. It's going to more likely to come back and bite me. And I certainly lost friends over it, or people who I thought were friends, but actually I'm glad I lost them as friends because they weren't. But again, we need more people who are just doing it because it's the right thing to do, and they're not doing it for personal advancement. And I think, again, when you've got that whole infrastructure of the left and there's money coming from EU institutions and billionaires, it just works against having a decent, honest activist base. And it's really, really hard because people who work just don't have the time, and we have to do everything in our spare time. But it needs to be done that way, and it needs to be done by people who don't really, who don't have an agenda, who aren't looking to become the next MP for God knows where, and all that kind of stuff. We can do it. It's going to take a long time.
It will take a long time, but if we can, I'd like to start getting back out on the streets again at weekends and doing my street stalls. I absolutely loved doing that. I loved talking to people and finding out what their thoughts were on different things and how they were just getting on in life and how we could try and improve things for people. Do you think that people should be putting themselves forward to be local councillors, or if they should be challenging at the next election, or just concentrating on building movements within their local areas? Because like you said, I've tried to do this, and I'm finding that people are so bloody busy trying to make ends meet. They've got 2-3 jobs, they've got kids to look after, mums are working, doing cleaning jobs in the morning, in the evening, maybe working in a pub, dad's driving a taxi as well as doing another job, and they just don't have the time to do any activist work or get involved. And I think that's by design, by the way.
I agree. I completely agree.
I do think that's absolutely by design. People just haven't got the time to think. A lot of people say, oh, I don't do politics because I don't understand it. I've had this conversation with many people, and it's like, well, do your kids go to school? Do you use the local hospital? How's waiting times at your GP? And those are the kind, yes, you do politics because those are the things that affect you every single day in your life. So I understand why people can't get involved in a movement. Like I say, I think that's by design, and I think the only way we can try to get power or to change things is to get power, is to get into Parliament. Although I hate the parliamentary system and the structure of it, and it does need a complete system change, in my opinion. In my opinion, if I had it my way, I'd devolve everything to regional structures, because us here in England, we're completely dictated to by Westminster. They have no clue what's going on up my neck of the woods, or probably in Birmingham where you are, Phil. And they have no interest either. So with that, I'm just going to go for some questions, actually. Are you all right?
Okay. Yeah.
have some questions,
Yeah,
and
of
then
course.
we'll
I like
have a bit
questions,
of
actually.
a summary. All right, let me
Yeah.
put my specs on because I can't see a bloody thing. Okay, so Jonathan Cooper says the sooner the left can turn their backs on Parliament and parliamentary elections, the better. Well, I think we just discussed that. If there's anything you'd like to say to that.
I actually don't necessarily agree, because I think if nothing else, I think standing for Parliament is, or I don't mean Parliament, I think more important right now actually than standing for Parliament is standing in local elections, because it's just a good opportunity to get the message out to people, to talk to people, and then maybe get a representative who can do some good, and then have a platform to talk about the issues that we need to talk about. So I don't think we should see it as something that's worth doing like for its own sake, but there is a difference that people can make. And I say that because a good friend of mine is James Giles, who's an independent councillor down in Kingston upon Thames. He helped me out with my estate regeneration campaigning. When I was disowned by my local Labour Party, I went to him for help, and he's still running his independent campaigns then. And he said, I said, would you help me? And he said, I don't see why anyone wouldn't. And so now he's a very good friend. He's a brilliant local councillor, and he is making a difference. He made a difference before he was a councillor as well. So this is the thing. It's not a case of, when I get in, maybe I'll do something. It's a case of doing what is right, and hopefully that will give people the confidence to vote you into power so you can do more that is right. So it's not pursuing it for its own sake, but pursuing it for the difference that you can make and for the very concrete, specific objectives that you have for that office. And there's not many people can do it, have the time to run in a campaign. I think it's a case of, instead of having like a blanket commitment to this number of councillors across the country, it's, if there is a good candidate somewhere, or if you think you could be a good candidate, have a go and stand and, do your best and see what happens. And it's always better if you can target quite carefully and have a good organisation around you. But I don't think there's any particular harm in doing it at all, so long as it's not for Labour.
Exactly.
or potentially the Greens. A lot of people saying the Greens. No, not the Greens. There's forces of NATO.
Actually, somebody put that in the chat, not the Greens. Can you just tell people why not to go to Green? Because I think a lot of people just default to the Greens, and I have a big issue with the Greens. But I'd like to hear from you.
They're not in any way socialist. They're liberal. If you look at what they've done in, say, Brighton, where they've actually been in power, it's a disaster zone. They are pro-NATO, so pro the military-industrial complex and all of the environmental horrors that come with that, which is worth thinking about given their professed politics. And I know somebody who was a Green councillor. They were brilliant, but as a whole, the Greens are bad uns. If you also look back, when Jeremy was leader of the Labour Party, if the Greens really were about what they say they're about, they would have backed him, and they didn't. They very pointedly didn't. They are not the solution. They are part of the problem. And if you doubt that, I just direct you to Baerbock in Germany, who is probably one of the most reactionary politicians in the West. She's very pro-war. Just awful politician. The Greens are not the solution. They're part of the problem, in my view.
Yeah, totally agree with you on that one. I just want to say thank you to Katie Marshall and Gunt for sending solidarity to me. Thank you. That touched my heart. Katie says we can start with a more social democratic party to start the left shift in the country, then start People's Committee for major areas of society. That's one way to start, I guess. Well, I suppose, Phil and I should fess up that we are part of the Workers' Party. You probably know that Chris and I started the Resist movement for a People's Party before the lockdown, and we've recently joined the Workers' Party. The Workers' Party is now going to be our electoral vehicle, and there's many of our members have joined the Workers' Party as well. Phil, why did you join the Workers' Party?
I liked what they were doing locally. They were engaged in campaigning against a low traffic neighbourhood, which is appalling divisive and regressive policies that don't actually work at all when it comes to the environment or anything else, in my view. But also, I mean, I saw that work, and then I went and I spoke to some of the guys here, and they were just nice, normal people, and I got on with them. And one of the great things about the Workers' Party for me is that they don't clear what I say on things like this. So I just come here and shoot my mouth off. I don't know.
They just let us do what we want, don't they? There's nobody.
And that's fine. And I think for me, the party, I'm not like saying everybody must join the Workers' Party, though I would recommend it. I think for me, my politics are more kind of loose than that. I'm not going to criticize somebody for standing as an independent in an area where they think they could win as an independent. What I think is more important at the moment is not to get in each other's way. That's why, for example, I wouldn't recommend somebody standing for the Workers' Party in Kingston upon Thames against my friend James, because he's a brilliant councillor. He's an independent. We can work with him. We don't need to work against each other. And then over time, this could build into something bigger. I don't think we need to necessarily start from like one big organization. I mean, again, I'm sort of writing something about a similar proposal at the moment. I think it's quite frightening because it's very anti-democratic and very controlling. And I think we should really avoid that if at all possible, because at the end of the day, that's going to lead to control by a clique. And we've already seen just how awful that can be. So we don't want that, in my view.
Yeah, and we've got loads of comrades who are doing all sorts of things. There's loads of people who, over in Liverpool, really good comrades. They're not in the Workers' Party, but we'll work together. We will work together. We will support each other. We've got comrades over in Winsford, the same. They're standing as independents. They've got a good, solid base, and we'll support each other. They're still on the same page. They're still socialists. They still have the same ideas.
We've also got an informal understanding with Tusk, and we try to stage out of each other's way as well. So, and this is exactly the way I like to work. Like, it's not dogmatic. It's recognizing shared interests, common aims, and working in the interests of those, the actual objectives that we're trying to achieve, as opposed to kind of dogma or ego or some kind of weird fidelity to a specific party. Even if most of the people in that party are more right-wing than conservatives. So it's much looser than that and more pragmatic, which is what I like, while also being principled and focused on the actual principles that we want to achieve. And that goes for the Workers' Party and the people that we cooperate with who are outside of the Workers' Party, which is a great thing. I absolutely, it's one of the reasons I'm involved in the Workers' Party, is that they're willing to do that.
Yeah. Paul Smith says he's with the Breakthrough Party. That's fine, Paul. You support, whatever party you want to support. As long as they've got socialist ideals, then that's great. Hopefully we can work together. Unfortunately, I think Breakthrough and a couple of other parties who joined, are they Transform now? They were PAL, weren't they?
Exactly, Transform. I know they're involved in Transform, but I don't know if they are.
Yeah, they were PAL. They were PAL, the Progressive Alliance of the Left, but they didn't want to work with us.
I got kicked out of PAL for sharing an article I wrote about Keir Starmer for the Workers' Party website.
Yeah, they kicked us out as well. So
so the problem with them is not that we weren't willing to work with them; it's that they weren't willing to.
They don't want to work with us.
Yeah.
So
I mean, again, each their own. People want to join with them, that's fine. It's just a shame that they won't work with us. If you want
nothing
to work
against you, Paul. Nothing against you, Paul. Maybe you could lobby them and tell them that we need to work together, because it's definitely them. It's them, not us.
You don't actually have to agree with everything that. I mean, this is the thing. We don't all agree on everything. I don't agree with everything George Galloway says. I do respect him as a person. I think he's got a lot of integrity. But that's the point. We don't actually have to agree on all points. It's if we can focus on areas of agreement in campaigning and stuff, that's what we want to do, and kind of downplay the areas of disagreement where they're not relevant.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the biggest areas where the left has failed in the past.
Absolutely,
they ruin things that by this constant infighting, and they've got to get over it. They've got to work with people who they don't necessarily agree with, but they agree with them on some points for the greater good. And the left has got to get over this, otherwise we're going nowhere.
Yeah, it's not about to me, it's not about how you look as an individual. And if you happen to be on a platform with this person, how that makes you look. It's about the policy and the point and the outcome that you're trying to achieve by doing that. So if you're standing on a platform with, say, someone even like Nigel Farage, for instance, I know George did once, and it was once. He's got a load of hate for. It was because they both agreed on the necessity of Brexit. And I think actually in the future that is the way we should work, because whether you like him or not, Farage has a reach, and standing on that platform with him gave George access to some of those people who might actually be, who are not dyed in the wool political necessarily, and might actually be open to some socialist ideas.
Sorry, I'm laughing. Katie's just put, man frog. Katie, that's really tickled me. I'll never look at it the same way again.
I think not to go on looks, but I think people do liken him to Mr. Toad.
Yeah, Toad of Toad Hall.
Yeah.
Phil, I think we're running out of time. We're now at the top of the hour. I have so enjoyed this conversation with you. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything that you would like to say? I'll give you the final word on lessons we have learned from the Corbyn era.
Thank you. I think really I just want to re-emphasize the point on not being too factional and narrow, because a lot of the people we talk to in the street won't necessarily be committed socialists at this point in time, and the challenge is to win them over to our cause. It's not to lecture them on why they are wrong. It's to demonstrate it through our action and also through our solidarity with them on the issues that are affecting them. By doing that, we'll bring them over, and hopefully we'll create a movement that's not run from the top by these kind of bureaucrats who've got funny connections to the establishment, but by people themselves who've got real issues that they are trying to rectify in their communities.
That's great. Thank you so much, Phil. And thank you to everybody for commenting on the chat tonight and for watching us. If you would like any further information, then you can look on the website at www.workerspartybritain.org. You can follow Resistance TV Pod on Twitter and on Facebook. And if you've really enjoyed what we do here, please leave us a like, as it helps us to beat censorship, beat that algorithm, get out there so we can get through to more people. So give us a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and with that I'll bid you good night, and we'll see you next week.